It was a sweltering summer afternoon in late June when my wife, Laura, and I pulled into the driveway of our new home in Oak Ridge Meadows, a gated community on the outskirts of a mid-sized town in Georgia. I'd just been promoted to police chief a few months earlier, a role that came with its share of stress, but also the perk of stability. Enough to finally afford a place where our family could put down roots. The house was a charming ranch style with a two-car garage, manicured lawns mandated by the HOA, and a view of rolling hills that promised peaceful evenings. But what really sealed the deal for me was the garage space for my pride and joy. A 1967 Ford Mustang GT, cherry red with white racing stripes, inherited from my late father. He'd restored it himself over decades, pouring sweat and stories into every bolt. It wasn't just a car, it was a piece of him, a reminder of weekend drives through the countryside, teaching me to drive stick when I was 16. Laura teased me about it being my third child, but she understood. The Mustang was family. We'd moved from a cramped apartment in the city where parking was a nightmare to this suburbia haven. Our kids, Sophie, 10, and Ben, 7, were ecstatic about the backyard and the community pool. "Dad, can we wash the Mustang here?" Ben asked as we unloaded boxes, his eyes wide with excitement. I ruffled his hair. "You bet, buddy. This driveway's perfect for it." The HOA packet we'd received at closing was thick as a novel. Rules on fence heights, approved shrubbery, and a whole section on vehicles. No RVs, no commercial vans, and cars had to be in good repair, with no extended parking on streets. I skimmed it, figuring as long as the Mustang stayed in the garage most days, we'd be fine. It wasn't a daily driver. I took it out for spins on weekends, polishing it under the Georgia sun. Our first week was blissfully uneventful. Neighbors waved as we settled in, except for one. Across the street lived Karen Thompson, the HOA president, a woman in her late 40s with a perpetual scowl hidden behind oversized sunglasses and a visor that screamed "Tennis Club Elite." She drove a pristine white Lexus. Her lawn looked like it was trimmed with nail scissors, and her teenage son, Dylan, lounged on the porch with his phone, blasting music that somehow never violated the noise ordinance. Karen introduced herself on day 2, knocking on our door with a basket of store-bought muffins and a stack of reminders. "Welcome to Oak Ridge," she said, her smile tight. "I'm Karen, and I make sure everything runs smoothly here. Just a heads up, we have strict guidelines on vehicle maintenance. No eyesores." I chuckled, thinking she was joking. "Thanks, Karen. I'm Mark. This is Laura. We're excited to be here." But her eyes flicked to the Mustang, partially visible in the open garage, and something in her expression soured. It started small. A note slipped under our door a few days later. Reminder: vehicles must be garaged when not in use to maintain aesthetic standards. I shrugged it off. The Mustang was garaged 90% of the time. But then came the emails. Karen, as HOA Pres, had access to everyone's contact info. "Dear Mr. Reynolds," one read, "your classic vehicle appears to be in violation of Section 4.2. No antique or modified cars parked visibly for extended periods." Extended periods? I'd washed it in the driveway once. Laura read it over my shoulder, frowning. "Is she serious? It's a beautiful car, not a junker." I emailed back politely. "Appreciate the concern, but the Mustang is well-maintained and garaged nightly." Her reply was swift. "Compliance is mandatory. Fines start at $50 per infraction." The tension built subtly at first. Sophie and Ben made friends with neighborhood kids, but I noticed how parents glanced at our house during playdates. One mom, Sheila from down the block, confided over coffee, "Karen's a stickler. She fined us for a basketball hoop last year, said it was unsightly. Just keep your head down." But keeping my head down wasn't my style, especially after 20 years on the force, rising from patrol to chief. I dealt with real problems: burglaries, domestics, community outreach. Petty HOA drama felt like a joke, but it grated. The Mustang wasn't just a hobby. It was therapy. After long shifts dealing with the town's underbelly, I'd tinker with it, remembering Dad's lessons on patience and precision. Then came the first real clash. It was a Saturday morning, the kind where the air smells like fresh-cut grass and coffee brews strong. I had the Mustang out, hood up, giving it a tune-up. Ben was helping, handing me tools with greasy hands. Karen's Lexus pulled up across the street, and out she stormed, phone in hand. "Mark, this is unacceptable. That car is blocking the view and attracting attention." "Blocking the view?" It was in my driveway. "Karen, it's my property. I'm just working on it for an hour." She crossed her arms. "The bylaws say no mechanical work in view of the street. It's disturbing the peace." Ben looked up, confused. "But Dad's fixing it so it runs better." Karen ignored him, dialing her phone dramatically. "I'm reporting this to the board." She snapped photos before driving off. That afternoon, an official HOA notice arrived via certified mail. $100 fine for visible vehicle maintenance. Laura was furious. "Who does she think she is? We've barely unpacked." I paid it to avoid escalation, but it stung, financially and emotionally. The promotion to chief meant more responsibility, less overtime pay, and we were stretching to cover the mortgage. That $100 could have been school supplies for the kids. Over dinner, Sophie asked, "Why is that lady mad at our car, Dad? Grandpa's Mustang is cool." I forced a smile. "Some people just like rules too much, sweetie." But inside, I seethed. This wasn't about aesthetics. It was power. Karen thrived on control, and our arrival disrupted her kingdom. As weeks turned to months, her nitpicking intensified. Another fine for excessive driveway use. Apparently, parking the Mustang outside during a rainstorm to avoid garage flooding violated some clause. I appealed to the HOA board, a group of her cronies who rubber-stamped everything. At the meeting, held in the community clubhouse, Karen presided like a judge. "Mr. Reynolds, Oak Ridge prides itself on uniformity. Your vehicle draws undue attention." I presented photos of other classic cars in the neighborhood. A neighbor's Corvette, another's vintage truck. "Why single us out?" She smirked. "Those are compliant. Yours is flashy." The board sided with her, upholding the fine. The emotional toll crept in. Laura started avoiding neighborhood walks, whispering about feeling watched. Ben stopped asking to help with the car, sensing the tension. I buried myself in work, overseeing a department of 50 officers, implementing community programs to build trust after a rough year of protests. But home should have been a refuge. One night, after a grueling shift involving a domestic call that hit too close to memories of my own turbulent childhood, I sat in the garage, staring at the Mustang. Dad had left it to me in his will, along with a note. "Drive it proud, son. Life's too short for regrets." Karen was turning pride into a burden. Then, the incident with Dylan. Karen's son was 17, spoiled rotten, with a learner's permit and dreams of hot rods. I'd seen him eyeing the Mustang from his porch, once even wandering over while I polished it. "Sweet ride, man," he said, circling it like a shark. "How much you want for it?" I laughed. "Not for sale, kid. Family heirloom." His face twisted. "Everything's for sale. Mom says you're violating rules anyway. Might as well sell before she finds you out." I raised an eyebrow. "Tell your mom we're good." But that planted a seed. Whispers from Sheila confirmed it. Dylan had a history of entitlement, crashing his bike into mailboxes and blaming others, with Karen always bailing him out. The breaking point came during a neighborhood block party in August. The HOA hosted it at the park, grills smoking, kids running. I brought the Mustang for a show and tell, parking it legally on the street per the event permit. Families admired it. What a beauty! Reminds me of my first car. Dylan approached, bolder this time. Let me take it for a spin. I shook my head. No can do. Insurance and all? He puffed up. My mom's in charge here. She can make you. Before I could respond, Karen appeared. Dylan, honey, what's wrong? He whined. He won't let me drive it. She turned to me, eyes blazing. Mark, it's a community event. Share the spirit. I stayed calm. It's not a toy, Karen. She huffed off, but I saw her whispering to board members. That night, back home, I got a call from dispatch. Non-emergency, but as chief, I monitored. A resident reported a suspicious vehicle in Oak Ridge. My gut twisted. Sure enough, an officer radioed, Chief, it's your Mustang. Caller says it's abandoned. Abandoned? It was in my driveway. I stepped outside to find Karen standing there, phone out, as a patrol car pulled up. Officer, she said, this car's been an eyesore for months. Tow it. The young cop, Ramirez, recognized me immediately. Chief Reynolds? This your place? I stood in my driveway, the humid August air clinging to my skin as Officer Ramirez tipped his hat awkwardly, caught between Karen's glare and my own steady gaze. The Mustang gleamed under the streetlight, its red paint almost mocking the absurdity of the moment. Karen, arms crossed, clutched her phone like a badge of authority. This vehicle's been a problem since they moved in, she told Ramirez, her voice dripping with righteous indignation. It's parked improperly, and I've had complaints. Complaints? The block party had ended hours ago, and the car was legally in my driveway. Ramirez glanced at me, clearly uncomfortable. Chief, this is your call. Looks fine to me. I nodded, keeping my tone calm despite the anger bubbling inside. Thanks, Ramirez. False alarm. You can head out. He hesitated, then slid back into his patrol car, leaving Karen fuming. This isn't over, Mark, she snapped before marching back to her house. Dylan lingered across the street, smirking, his phone glowing as he recorded the whole thing. Laura was waiting inside, her arms wrapped around herself. She called the cops? On our car? Her voice trembled, not with fear but with fury. Sophie and Ben were in their pajamas, peeking from the living room, their faces pale. Dad, are they going to take the Mustang? Ben asked, clutching his toy car. I knelt down, forcing a smile. No way, buddy. It's ours, and it's staying. But as I tucked them in, Sophie whispered, Why does that lady hate us? I didn't have a good answer. That night, Laura and I sat at the kitchen table, the HOA rule book spread out like a battle map. She's targeting us, Laura said, her finger jabbing at the page on vehicle regulations. This is personal, I agreed. Karen's obsession with the Mustang wasn't about rules, it was about control, and Dylan's whining had clearly fueled her fire. The next morning, I checked the security cameras. Sure enough, footage from earlier showed Dylan circling the Mustang at the block party, running his hand along the hood, peering into the windows. It wasn't admiration, it was entitlement. I saved the clip, sensing it might come in handy. Meanwhile, Karen escalated. An email hit my inbox. Another $150 fine for improper vehicle storage, and a warning that continued violations may result in towing at owner's expense. Laura read it over my shoulder, her jaw tight. We can't keep paying these. The kids' school fees are due next month. She was right. Our budget was stretched thin. My chief's salary was decent, but with a new mortgage and 2 kids, every dollar counted. Paying fines for a car that was legally parked on our property felt like theft. I decided to fight back, but quietly. As police chief, I knew the value of evidence and strategy. I called the county clerk's office to confirm our property lines and HOA jurisdiction. The clerk sent over our deed and plat map, which clearly showed our driveway and garage as private property, exempt from HOA parking rules unless the vehicle was on the street. Armed with this, I requested a meeting with the HOA board. Laura suggested we loop in Sheila, who'd become an ally after her own run-ins with Karen. Over coffee at her place, Sheila shared more dirt. Karen's been president for 5 years, she said, stirring sugar into her mug. She pushes people out if they challenge her. And Dylan? He's untouchable. She got his speeding tickets fixed last year. That raised my eyebrows. Fixing tickets wasn't a small thing, and I made a mental note to check the department's records. The board meeting was a circus. Held in the community clubhouse, it smelled of lemon cleaner and old carpet. Karen sat at the head of the table, flanked by her loyalists, 3 retirees who nodded at her every word. I presented the deed, the plat map, and photos of the Mustang in the driveway, explaining it was private property. The fines are baseless, I said, keeping my voice even. The HOA has no authority here. Karen leaned forward, her lips pursed. Mark, you're misinterpreting the rules. The aesthetic clause applies to all visible vehicles, private or not. I pointed out the inconsistency. Other classic cars in the neighborhood weren't fined. She waved it off. Those owners comply. You're new and already causing trouble. The board upheld the fine 4-1, with only one member, a quiet guy named Greg, looking uneasy. That night, Dylan upped the ante. I was in the garage, polishing the Mustang's chrome, when he sauntered over, hands in his pockets. Nice car, Chief, he said, the title dripping with mockery. Mom says you're breaking rules. I could take it off your hands. Name a price. I set down the rag, meeting his gaze. It's not for sale, Dylan. You know that. He shrugged, smirking. Mom can make things tough. You'll sell eventually. The audacity floored me. This wasn't just a spoiled kid. It was a power play, backed by Karen's influence. I kept my cool, knowing losing my temper could backfire. Go home, Dylan, I said. He laughed and walked off, but not before kicking a pebble at the Mustang's tire. The next week was relentless. Karen sent daily emails, each citing new violations, a smudge on the Mustang's bumper, visible from the street. Apparently, a noise complaint from me revving the engine briefly to check the carburetor. She even reported us to code enforcement for potential zoning issues with the garage, which the town inspector dismissed after a 5-minute visit. Your HOA's got too much time on their hands, he muttered, shaking his head. Laura was unraveling, snapping at the kids over small things, her usual warmth buried under stress. Mark, we can't live like this, she said one night, her eyes red. This was supposed to be our fresh start. I felt it too. The weight of her disappointment, the kids' confusion, the betrayal of a dream home turned battleground. I started digging deeper. As chief, I had access to department records, so I checked Dylan's file. Sure enough, 2 speeding tickets from last year had been resolved without fines, flagged as administrative dismissals. The officer involved was a retired deputy who'd been close to Karen's husband, a local attorney. It wasn't hard proof of corruption, but it was suspicious. I also reached out to Greg, the board member who'd seemed uncomfortable. Over beers at a local dive bar, he spilled. Karen's been skimming HOA funds, he whispered. Petty stuff, catering for meetings that never happened, supplies she claims but never shows. I've got emails, but I'm scared to cross her. I promised to keep him anonymous and asked for copies. He sent them the next day, $3,000 in vague invoices, all signed by Karen. We needed a plan. Laura and I brainstormed with Sheila and a few other neighbors who'd joined our cause after hearing about the fines. We formed a group chat dubbed Mustang Resistance and shared stories. One family had been fined for a kid's lemonade stand, another for unapproved holiday lights. The pattern was clear. Karen targeted anyone who didn't bow to her. We decided to hit back on 2 fronts. Legally, by filing an injunction to stop the HOA from enforcing rules on our private property, and politically, by pushing for a board recall. The bylaws allowed a recall vote with 60% of resident signatures, 48 out of 80 homes. By week's end, we had 45. Thanks to Sheila's knack for rallying neighbors, Karen sensed the tide turning. She doubled down, posting signs around Oak Ridge. "Support our standards!" The air in Oak Ridge Meadows grew heavy with tension, like the quiet before a thunderstorm. Karen's campaign against us had turned our dream home into a battleground, and her son Dylan's brazen demands for the Mustang only fanned the flames. Every morning, I checked the security cameras, half expecting to find Karen or Dylan skulking around the driveway, plotting their next move. The latest fine, $200 for excessive vehicle visibility, sat unpaid on the kitchen counter, a taunting reminder of Karen's grip on the HOA. Laura's eyes were shadowed with worry, her usual laughter replaced by clipped words and restless pacing. "Mark, this isn't just about the car anymore," she whispered one night, the kids asleep upstairs. "She's trying to break us." I nodded, my jaw tight. As police chief, I'd faced down gang disputes and city council politics, but this felt personal, a direct assault on our family's sanctuary. The Mustang wasn't just metal and chrome. It was my dad's legacy, a symbol of the life we'd built for Sophie and Ben. Karen wasn't just stealing our peace. She was stealing their childhood. I dove into planning with a focus I hadn't felt since my days as a detective. The group chat, Mustang Resistance, buzzed with neighbors' stories. Karen's fines for a doghouse, a mailbox painted the wrong shade of blue, a kid's bike left on a lawn. Each grievance fueled our resolve. Sheila, our fiercest ally, suggested a bold move. A neighborhood car show on our property, showcasing the Mustang and other classic cars to rally support and prove a point. "Let's make it a celebration," she said, her eyes gleaming. "Show Karen we're not hiding." I loved the idea, but my cop instincts screamed caution. Karen would retaliate, hard. I called our lawyer, Tom, a grizzled real estate attorney who'd handled HOA cases before. "You've got a strong case," he said, reviewing our deed. "Your driveway's private, no question. File an injunction to block her fines, and we'll hit her with the financials later." The emails Greg sent, proof of Karen's shady $3,000 in consulting charges, were our ace in the hole. But we had to time it right. Karen's next move came faster than I expected. 2 days after the block party fiasco, a tow truck rumbled into Oak Ridge at dawn, idling in front of our house. I was up early, sipping coffee, when I saw it through the blinds. Karen stood beside it, gesturing to the Mustang, her voice sharp as she spoke to the driver. "That's the one. It's been reported abandoned." My blood ran cold. Abandoned? It was polished to a mirror shine, parked legally in my driveway. I stepped outside, badge in my pocket, but authority in my voice. "Morning, Karen. Problem?" The tow driver, a burly guy named Joe, who I recognized from a DUI case, froze when he saw me. "Chief Reynolds? This your place?" Karen's face twisted, her sunglasses slipping down her nose. "This is an HOA matter," she snapped. "The vehicle's a nuisance." Joe looked at me, then her. "Ma'am, I need proper paperwork. This looks private." I showed him the deed on my phone, and he backed off, the truck rolling away. Karen glared, muttering about escalating to the board. But I saw fear flicker in her eyes. That close call lit a fire under us. In the group chat, neighbors reported Karen's new tactics. Anonymous complaints about noise, flyers warning of rule breakers tanking property values. She even emailed the entire HOA, claiming my position as chief made me unfit to challenge her authority, implying I was using my badge to dodge rules. That was a low blow. My job was my pride, 20 years of service, rebuilding trust in a town scarred by mistrust. I called a meeting with our allies at Sheila's house, the air thick with coffee and determination. We had 45 signatures for the recall petition, 3 shy of the 60% needed. "We need to push the car show," Sheila urged. "Get those last signatures and show her we're united." We set a date, 2 weeks out, and got to work. Laura designed flyers, Oak Ridge Classic Car Show. Celebrate freedom. I secured a town permit, ensuring Karen couldn't shut it down. But Karen was relentless. The next day, Dylan showed up at our door, bold as brass. "Mom says you're causing trouble," he said, leaning against the porch railing. "Sell me the Mustang and this all stops. I'll give you 10 grand. 10 grand? The car was worth 5 times that, not to mention its sentimental value. I kept my cool, years of interrogations guiding me. "Not happening, Dylan. Go home." He smirked. "You'll regret that, Chief." That night, our mailbox was spray-painted with "Sell It" in sloppy red letters. The security footage showed a hooded figure, but the build matched Dylan's lanky frame. Laura was shaken, clutching Ben as he asked, "Is someone gonna hurt the car?" I promised him no, but my gut churned. This was escalating beyond fines. Vandalism was a crime, and I wasn't just a homeowner anymore. I was a cop with a duty. I filed a report with the department, keeping it discreet to avoid accusations of bias. I also sent the footage to Tom, who advised documenting everything. "If it's Dylan, Karen's protecting him," he said. "That's leverage." Meanwhile, we pushed forward with the car show. Neighbors volunteered their own classics, a '72 Chevelle, a '65 Corvette, turning it into a community stand. But Karen countered with a new HOA rule, pushed through in an emergency board meeting. No public exhibitions on private lots without approval. Approval she'd never grant. Tom grinned when I showed him the email. "She's overreaching. That rule's unenforceable on your property." We filed the injunction, citing our deed and her harassment, and requested a public audit of HOA finances, suspecting more dirt. The night before the car show, Karen struck again. A code enforcement officer knocked, citing a complaint about our garage's structural integrity. It was another dead end. The inspector found nothing, but it cost us a day of prep and frayed Laura's nerves further. Sophie, usually bubbly, drew a picture of the Mustang with a sad face, captioned, "Why can't we keep it?" My heart broke. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about my family, our neighbors, and standing up to a bully who thought she was untouchable. We had 47 signatures now, one short. The car show would be our make-or-break moment. As I polished the Mustang under the garage light, I heard a rustle outside. My hand went to my phone, ready to call for backup. Was it Dylan, Karen, or just the wind? The suspense was suffocating, but I knew one thing. We weren't backing down. The morning of the car show dawned bright and humid, the kind of Georgia heat that makes your shirt stick to your back by 8 a.m. Our driveway was transformed into a stage, the Mustang gleaming at its center, flanked by a neighbor's '72 Chevelle and a '65 Corvette, their chrome catching the sunlight like a beacon. Laura had strung up red, white, and blue bunting, giving the event a festive feel, while Sophie and Ben handed out lemonade to early arrivals. The Mustang Resistance group chat was alive with last-minute plans. Sheila coordinating food, Greg promising to bring his classic Pontiac, and others spreading the word. We had 47 signatures for the HOA board recall, one shy of the 48 needed for a vote. Today was our chance to clinch it, to show Karen we weren't just a family fighting for a car, but a community pushing back against her reign. Yet, the air felt charged, like a fuse waiting to spark. Karen hadn't shown her face since the code enforcement stunt, but I knew she was watching, planning her counterattack. As police chief, I'd learned to trust my gut, and it was screaming. This wasn't over. By noon, the car show was in full swing. Over 50 neighbors filled our lawn, their voices mingling with the hum of classic engines and kids' laughter. The Mustang drew a crowd, folks snapping photos, swapping stories about their own dream cars. A retired mechanic named Carl ran his hand along the hood, grinning. "Your dad did good, Mark. This is a masterpiece." I smiled, but my eyes scanned the street, watching for Karen's white Lexus. Laura noticed, squeezing my arm. "Relax, hun. We've got permits, the deed, everything. She can't touch us." But I wasn't so sure. Karen's silence felt like the quiet before an ambush. And Dylan's vandalism, the spray-painted mailbox, still gnawed at me. I'd sent the footage to my deputy Ramirez for analysis, but it was too blurry to pin on Dylan definitively. Still, I kept the cameras rolling, their red lights blinking from the garage. Around 2 p.m., trouble stirred. A group of Karen's loyalists, 3 board members and a handful of her tennis club friends, showed up, standing at the edge of our property with folded arms. They didn't join the fun, just whispered and pointed, their phones out like they were documenting evidence. Sheila sidled up to me, her voice low. "They're reporting to her." "Bet she's planning something." I nodded, keeping my cool. As chief, I'd dealt with worse than HOA snitches, but the stakes felt higher here. This was home. Then a new face appeared. Mrs. Larson, an older widow who'd kept to herself. She approached with a petition clipboard, her hand shaking. "I heard what you're doing," she said softly. "Karen fined me for my rose bushes last year, took my grocery money. I want to sign." That was it. Number 48. The crowd cheered as she scribbled her name, and I felt a surge of hope. We could force the recall vote now, but Karen wasn't done. At 3 p.m., her Lexus rolled up, followed by a town code enforcement van. My heart sank. She stepped out, visor low, clipboard in hand, with Dylan trailing behind, smirking. The code officer, a nervous guy named Tim I'd met at a council meeting, looked apologetic. "Mr. Reynolds, we got a call about an unpermitted event causing congestion." Karen cut in, her voice sharp. "This car show violates HOA event rules and blocks the street." "Shut it down." I held up the town permit, signed and dated. "We're on private property, Tim. Everything's legal." He skimmed the document, then glanced at Karen. "Looks in order, ma'am." "I can't do anything." Her face reddened, but she pivoted. "Then it's an HOA violation. You'll be fined $500 for unauthorized assembly." The crowd murmured, some shouting, "That's ridiculous." Dylan pulled out his phone, recording, his grin daring me to react. I kept my voice steady, years of de-escalating crises kicking in. "Karen, the HOA has no jurisdiction here. This is my land, my driveway. And I'm the police chief. You think I'd break the law?" A few neighbors chuckled, but the tension was palpable. Tim backed off, muttering about a misunderstanding, and drove away. Karen stayed, glaring as Dylan edged closer to the Mustang. "Nice car, Chief," he said loudly. "Too bad it's causing all this trouble. Sell it to me, and Mom stops." The crowd went quiet, eyes on me. I stepped closer, lowering my voice so only he could hear. "Back off, kid. You're out of your depth?" He laughed, but it was nervous, and he retreated to Karen's side. She stormed off, vowing to escalate to legal action. But the crowd's boos followed her. The car show ended triumphantly, with 3 more neighbors signing the petition, pushing us to 51, well over the threshold. We celebrated with burgers and music, but the victory felt fragile. That night, Laura and I pored over Tom's injunction draft, which would block the HOA from fining us further. Greg's emails about Karen's shady finances were gold. $3,000 in vague consulting fees, plus a $1,500 landscaping reimbursement for her own yard. "This could be fraud," Tom said over the phone. "If we present it at the recall vote, she's toast." But Karen's next move came faster than we expected. At dawn, I found a new notice taped to the Mustang. Towing scheduled, 48 hours. It cited a board emergency order, claiming the car was a public nuisance. My hands shook as I read it. Laura, seeing my face, grabbed her phone. "We're calling Tom now." We met Tom at his office, the air thick with the scent of old books and coffee. He reviewed the notice and laughed. "This is desperate. They can't tow from private property without a court order." He filed the injunction that afternoon, citing our deed and Karen's harassment, and requested an emergency hearing. Meanwhile, the group chat exploded. Neighbors reported Karen spreading lies, claiming I was abusing police power to dodge fines. That hit hard. My career was built on integrity, and she was dragging it through the mud. I checked the department's records again, finding another dismissed ticket for Dylan. This one for reckless driving. The pattern was clear. Karen used her husband's connections to shield him. I sent the info to Tom, who added it to our case file. As the recall vote loomed, we planned a final push. A neighborhood meeting at Sheila's house to present our evidence and rally for the vote. But the night before, I got a call from Ramirez. "Chief, we got a vandalism report. Your Mustang, someone keyed the side." My heart stopped. I ran outside, flashlight in hand. Sure enough, a jagged scratch ran along the driver's door, deep enough to ruin the paint. The security footage showed a hooded figure again, too vague for ID, but the timing screamed. The scratch on the Mustang's cherry-red door felt like a wound on my own skin, a jagged reminder of Karen's vendetta and Dylan's reckless entitlement. As the sun rose over Oak Ridge Meadows, I stood in the driveway, staring at the damage, my fists clenched. Laura joined me, her face pale but resolute. "Mark, we can't let them win," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Ben and Sophie were still asleep, unaware of the latest blow, but I could still hear Ben's question from weeks ago. Is someone gonna hurt the car? I'd promised him no, and now that promise felt broken. The recall vote was 3 days away, and the stakes had never been higher. Karen's emergency towing order was still taped to the windshield, a taunt daring us to fight back. But we had the injunction filed, 51 signatures for the recall, and Greg's emails proving Karen's shady finances. This wasn't just about saving the Mustang anymore. It was about dismantling her empire and protecting our home. I called Ramirez first thing, asking him to process the vandalism report with priority. "It's personal, Chief," he said, reviewing the blurry footage. "No clear ID, but the build matches that kid across the street." I nodded, keeping my emotions in check. As a cop, I knew accusations without hard proof could backfire, especially with Karen's husband, a well-connected attorney in her corner. Instead, I focused on strategy. Tom, our lawyer, called with good news. The injunction hearing was set for the day after the recall vote, and the judge had fast-tracked it based on Karen's overreach. "The towing notice is a bluff," Tom said. "No legal grounds, but her financials? Those emails are dynamite. Save them for the vote." I agreed, though the weight felt like torture. Every creak of the house, every shadow outside, made me jump, expecting another stunt from Karen or Dylan. The neighborhood meeting at Sheila's was our next move. We invited every resident, framing it as a community forum to discuss the recall. Sheila's living room was packed. Over 60 people crammed in, some standing, others perched on folding chairs. The air smelled of potluck casseroles and nervous anticipation. I started with the Mustang, showing photos of the scratch and the tow notice. "This isn't just about my car," I said, my voice carrying the weight of months of harassment. "It's about Karen using the HOA to bully us all." Laura passed around copies of our deed, proving our driveway was private. Greg, nervous but resolute, shared the financials, $4,500 in questionable expenses, including a consulting fee to a company tied to Karen's husband. Gasps rippled through the room. Sheila stood, her voice fierce. "She fined my daughter's lemonade stand $100. Enough is enough." Others chimed in. A retiree fined for unapproved birdhouses. A single dad hit for a messy lawn during chemo. The anger was palpable, a storm ready to break. Karen caught wind of the meeting and struck back. The next morning, a glossy HOA newsletter hit every mailbox, accusing certain residents, clearly us, of undermining community values and abusing authority. She named me specifically, claiming my role as police chief made my defiance a threat to Oak Ridge's safety. It was a gut punch. My career was built on trust, and she was painting me as a rogue cop. I called the mayor, a friend from my academy days, to give him a heads up. "Mark, I know you," he said. "This is HOA nonsense. Handle it, but keep it clean." I assured him I would, but the smear stung. Laura, usually my rock, was shaken. "What if this hurts your job?" she asked, her eyes searching mine. I hugged her tight. "It won't. We've got truth on our side." We rallied the troops. The group chat swelled to 30 households, sharing more evidence. Photos of Karen snooping in yards, screenshots of her threatening emails. One neighbor, a tech guy named Raj, hacked together a timeline of her finds, showing a pattern of targeting newcomers or anyone who challenged her. We nominated Sheila, Greg, and a quiet nurse named Maria for the new board. People Karen couldn't intimidate. Tom helped us draft a recall petition presentation, blending our property rights case with the financial misconduct. But the vandalism kept me on edge. I upgraded our security system, adding floodlights and a motion sensor. Late at night, I'd check the footage, half expecting to see Dylan with a key or worse. Once, at 2 a.m., I caught a shadow moving near the garage, but by the time I got outside, it was gone. Was it paranoia, or was Karen escalating? The day before the vote, Karen played her dirtiest card yet. A letter arrived from her husband's law firm, threatening a defamation lawsuit against me for spreading lies about her finances. It demanded we withdraw the recall petition or face significant legal consequences. Laura's hands shook as she read it, but Tom laughed when I sent it to him. "Classic intimidation," he said. "No grounds. They're bluffing to scare you." Still, the threat hung over us like a dark cloud. Sophie overheard us talking and asked, "Dad, are we in trouble?" I knelt down, forcing a smile. "No, sweetie. We're fighting for what's right." But her worried eyes mirrored my own fears. If we lost the vote, Karen could tighten her grip, maybe even push for more than fines, eviction notices, liens, or worse. The night before the vote, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the garage, the Mustang's curves lit by a dim bulb, my dad's old toolbox open beside me. I ran my fingers over the scratch, feeling the weight of his memory in our fight. Laura found me there, wrapping her arms around me. "We've got this," she whispered. "The neighbors are with us." She was right. Texts poured in, confirming 55 households would attend the vote. But Karen's influence was deep. Her loyalists, about 20 strong, could sway enough votes to save her. And Dylan's smirks, his taunts about the Mustang, echoed in my mind. I'd dealt with criminals who backed down under pressure, but Karen was different. Relentless, entitled, and backed by a system she'd rigged. As I locked the garage, I heard a car slow down outside, its headlights flashing across the driveway. My pulse raced. Was it her? Dylan? Or just a neighbor? The vote was hours away, and the suspense was a knife's edge. We had one shot to take her down, and failure wasn't an option. The morning of the recall vote broke with a heavy stillness, the kind that settles over a town before a verdict. Oak Ridge Meadows Community Center was a modest brick building, but today it felt like a courtroom, charged with the weight of our fight against Karen. My stomach churned as Laura and I arrived early, setting up a projector for Tom's presentation. The kids stayed with Sheila, spared from the tension, but their faces, Sophie's worried eyes, Ben's quiet questions about the Mustang, drove me forward. We had 55 confirmed supporters, more than enough for the 48 votes needed to recall Karen's board, but her loyalists were a wild card. Her defamation letter, accusing me of abusing my police chief authority, sat heavy in my mind. If she twisted this into a smear campaign, she could sway the undecided, painting us as troublemakers. The Mustang, still scarred from Dylan's keying, was safely garaged, but its presence loomed, a symbol of everything we were fighting for. By 6:30 p.m., the center was packed, over 70 residents filling the folding chairs, their whispers buzzing like static. The air smelled of burnt coffee and anticipation, the fluorescent lights casting stark shadows. Karen stood at the front, her visor swapped for a crisp blazer, her smile a mask of confidence. Dylan slouched beside her, phone in hand, smirking like he knew something we didn't. Her loyalists, 20 or so, clustered near the podium, nodding as she opened with a speech about preserving Oak Ridge's values. Certain residents, she said, her eyes locking on me, are using their positions to defy our rules, threatening our community's harmony. My blood boiled, but I stayed silent, years of police training keeping my face neutral. Laura squeezed my hand under the table, her grip tight but steady. It was our turn. I stood, heart pounding, and started with the personal. "This Mustang," I said, projecting a photo of it gleaming in our driveway, "was my dad's. He left it to me, a piece of our family. Karen's tried to take it, fining us, threatening to tow it from our own property. I showed the deed, the plat map, proving our driveway was private. She's overstepped, not just on us, but on all of you." Tom took over, his voice calm but cutting. He displayed Greg's emails, $4,500 in shady HOA expenses, from consulting fees to landscaping for Karen's own yard. The crowd gasped, chairs creaking as people leaned forward. Sheila stood, her voice trembling with anger. "She fined my daughter's lemonade stand $100. That's not community. It's bullying." Others spoke up, a retiree about her rose bushes, a dad about his chemo-stricken lawn. The room crackled with shared outrage. Karen leapt up, banging the podium. "These are fabrications," she shouted. "I've dedicated years to this HOA, and this chief thinks he's above the law." She waved her husband's defamation letter, claiming we'd slandered her. Dylan smirked, filming the chaos. But Greg, pale but resolute, stood. "I've been on the board 3 years," he said. "Those expenses? I saw them. No receipts, no proof." Karen signed every check. The crowd erupted, voices overlapping, anger, betrayal, years of resentment boiling over. A woman in the HOA back yelled, "You fined my kid's bike for being on the grass." Another shouted, "My holiday lights weren't approved, $200 gone." Karen's face drained of color, her blazer suddenly looking too big for her shrinking frame. The vote was called. My pulse raced as residents lined up to mark ballots, each slip dropping into a locked box like a pebble in a pond. Laura's nails dug into my palm, her breath shallow. Karen stood by the box, watching every voter, her eyes darting like a cornered animal. I scanned the room, counting allies, Sheila, Greg, Maria, Mrs. Larson, Raj, but also her loyalists, whispering and glaring. What if they'd swayed enough? What if her smear about my job stuck? I'd faced down armed suspects with less fear, but this was personal. My family, my dad's legacy, our home. The counting took forever, each tally a heartbeat. When Greg read the results, 59 for recall, 15 against, the room exploded in cheers. Karen froze, her clipboard slipping to the floor. Dylan's smirk vanished, his phone dropping to his lap. We elected Sheila, Greg, and Maria as the new board, their nominations passing with overwhelming support. Karen tried one last stand, stammering about legal recourse, but the crowd drowned her out, chanting, "New board! New board!" She grabbed Dylan and slipped out the back, her Lexus screeching away. The room buzzed with relief, neighbors hugging, some crying. Mrs. Larson gripped my arm. "Thank you, Mark. I can plant my roses again." I smiled, but my mind was on the Mustang, on the kids, on the weight lifting from our lives. The aftermath was swift. The new board voided Karen's fines, including ours, and rewrote the bylaws to limit HOA overreach on private property. Tom's injunction hearing the next day was a formality. The judge upheld our deed, banning the HOA from interfering with our driveway. The audit of HOA funds confirmed Greg's emails. Karen had funneled $5,000 to shell companies tied to her husband. The state attorney general opened an investigation, and whispers spread that Karen was selling her house, unable to face the neighbors she'd bullied. Dylan's reckless driving tickets resurfaced, and with no one to fix them, he faced a suspended license. The Mustang got a fresh paint job, erasing the scratch, and Ben helped me polish it, his grin wide as he said, "It's like Grandpa's back." Laura and I sat on the porch weeks later, the kids playing in the yard, the Mustang gleaming in the garage. The neighborhood felt alive, barbecues, kids' bikes, holiday lights popping up without fear.